I'd like Dr. Fauci, if you don't mind, to follow up on what the president is saying. Should Americans have hope in this drug right now?
No, there really isn't that much of a difference in many respects with what we're saying. The president feels optimistic about something, his feeling about it. Fundamentally, I think it probably is going to be safe. But I like to prove things first. So it really is a question of not a lot of difference. It's the hope that it will work versus proving that it will work. So I don't see big differences here.
I agree.
Sir, your message to Americans.
I agree.
It was very clear that there were things that were said, be it regarding things like hydroxychloroquine and other things like that, that really was uncomfortable because they were not based on scientific fact. I can tell you, I take no pleasure at all in being in a situation of contradicting the president. So it was really something that you didn't feel that you could actually say something and there wouldn't be any repercussions about it. The idea that you can get up here and talk about what you know, what the evidence, what the science is, and know that's it. Let the science speak. It is somewhat of a liberating feeling.
A liberated Dr. Anthony Fauci at the White House briefing yesterday. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe. It is Friday, January 22nd. Along with Joe, Willie, and me, we have Washington anchor for BBC World News America, Katty Kay joins us. And White House editor for Politico, Sam Stein, joins us this morning. So President Biden laid out a comprehensive strategy against coronavirus yesterday. Biden has immediately signed an executive order for masks to be worn during interstate travel on airplanes, trains, buses, and at airports, and requiring travelers coming into the country to prove they have a recent negative coronavirus test, and that they will comply with quarantining guidelines once they've arrived. He's also directed agencies to use the Defense Production Act and other powers to manufacture badly needed protective gear and vaccine supplies. Biden called on Congress to get behind his efforts, saying the U.S. death toll will likely reach 500,000 next month.
Our national plan launches a full-scale wartime effort to address the supply shortages by ramping up production and protective equipment, syringes, needles, you name it. And when I say wartime, people kind of look at me like wartime. Well, as I said last night, 400,000 Americans have died. That's more than have died in all of World War II. 400,000. And this is a wartime undertaking. Today, I'm signing an executive action to use the Defense Production Act and all other available authorities to direct all federal agencies and private industry to accelerate the making of everything that's needed to protect, test, vaccinate, and take care of our people. I know these bold, practical steps will not come cheaply, but failing to do so will cost us so much more dearly. I look forward to working with members of both parties in the Congress. We're in a national emergency, and it's time we treat it like one, together with a national plan as the United States of America.
We played some of this at the top. Dr. Anthony Fauci stepping up to the White House briefing room podium for the first time in months yesterday and spoke pretty freely about how he felt of the previous administration and how it handled the coronavirus pandemic.
One of the new things in this administration is if you don't know the answer, don't guess. Just say you don't know the answer. One of the things that we're going to do is to be completely transparent, open, and honest. If things go wrong, not point fingers, but to correct them and to make everything we do be based on science and evidence. I mean, that was literally a conversation I had 15 minutes ago with the president. The idea that you can get up here and talk about what you know, what the evidence, what the science is, and know that's it. Let the science speak. It is somewhat of a liberating feeling. We certainly are not starting from scratch. We are continuing, but you're going to see a real ramping up of it. The goal that was set by the president of getting 100 million people vaccinated in the first 100 days is quite a reasonable goal. If we get 70 to 85% of the country vaccinated, let's say by the end of the summer, middle of the summer, I believe by the time we get to the fall, we will be approaching a degree of normality.
I mean, Willie, that's really the headline out of that entire press conference. A lot of Americans hearing Dr. Fauci saying, if we can get 75, 80 million out there by midsummer, then we're going to be approaching normality by the fall, normalcy by the fall. And we've heard in President Biden's first 2 days that he's doing all the things that not only this show, but so many other people and healthcare experts were begging Donald Trump to do starting in March, which is let's nationalize this, use the National Production Act, the Defense Production Act, throw everything that you've got at this. And the President Trump just refused to do that. Obviously, a new sheriff's in town.
Yeah, in one way, it was very refreshing to see Dr. Fauci put front and center. Jen Psaki introduced the press conference, then stepped aside and let him run it to put the scientists first. On the other hand, it was maddening to think about the last year of scientists being sidelined in favor of the president at that podium, pushing some of his wild theories about this and frankly lies about this. But yes, Joe Biden described it as a wartime situation, and it is. He's putting science out front and center and going to push vaccinations out to the country, as he said. They're not going from a standing start. That was something that was out there yesterday, that they were basically going from a clear slate, that there was nothing from the Trump administration. As Dr. Fauci said, they had started. It just needs to be expedited. So the push to ramp up coronavirus vaccinations hitting a roadblock, though. Cities and states across the country are reporting shortages. Some city leaders say they are running out of doses within a few days of getting their weekly allocation. That means tens of thousands of Americans who've been able to make an appointment for a first dose later have seen that appointment canceled. In New York City, for example, first responder agencies are suspending new vaccinations because of supply concerns. Both the NYPD and fire department have stopped giving first doses in an effort to ensure there are enough to cover second doses for those who've already had a first shot. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez spoke with New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio.
How frustrating has this process been?
Gabe, it's painful is the word I want to use. Frustrating and painful.
How soon before New York City runs out of vaccine?
This week.
Mayor Bill de Blasio says at least 23,000 appointments have been rescheduled.
The vaccine supply in America should have increased every single week. And we found that we hit a wall quickly.
So right now, at least a dozen states are reporting vaccine supply shortages. In Ohio, Republican Governor Mike DeWine wrote to the Biden administration pleading for more vaccines as the state struggles with high hospitalization rates. In California, Los Angeles County officials say they have most of the resources, like large vaccine centers and enough personnel to run them. But again, they lack the doses they need. And in Florida, the state Surgeon General, citing a scarce supply, has issued a new directive limiting vaccines to permanent and seasonal residents to cut down on so-called vaccine tourism, people flying in from around the country and even around the world to get vaccines in Florida. So, Sam Stein, you've been reporting on this a little bit. A lot of that infrastructure, state by state, is in place. The doses just aren't getting out quickly enough.
Yeah, I mean, this was the problem with the Trump approach, which was essentially, we'll get the vaccine produced, we'll help expedite that process, we'll get it shipped to the states, and then it's up to you. Which I guess in theory, if you're a Federalist, that seems alluring, but in practice, it created a whole host of logistical problems and vaccine shortages now that states and localities are having to contend with. And this is sort of indicative of the entire mess we're in right now. What Biden announced yesterday was remarkable only because it was so simple and obvious. The steps that he was outlining, I think we all agree, could have and probably should have been done many, many months ago. And you have to look back and wonder where we would be now if we had taken those very practical steps. He said it was bold and practical. In reality, they weren't. It's not particularly bold. I mean, those are steps that scientists, logistical experts, epidemiologists, all were saying needed to be done and need to be done early. It just happens that he inherited it when they hadn't been done. And as for the wartime presidency, I'll only say this. If someone were to come to us and say later this month, an incident will happen where 100,000 Americans will die, I imagine that Congress would expedite every possible response to deal with that and to thwart it and to ward it off. That's going to happen in the next month. There are no prognostications where that does not happen. The question is, do we still have any political urgency to try to prevent it? And the fear that you're seeing among people in the White House now is that we're sort of exhausted in terms of our sense of political urgency, that we've grown accustomed in a weird way to the idea that we will have 80, 90, 100,000 deaths a month. If this were a one-off incident, I think it would be much more alarming, but it's become part of our daily routine, unfortunately.
Yeah, much
really
more
has.
of our daily routine. And, you know, Caddy, there was a sense of exhaustion setting in the UK, but obviously with a new variant and a new surge of cases, large parts of Britain had to shut down. And obviously the healthcare crisis still raging there and taking the economy down with it.
Yeah, I think what's happened in the UK over the past month should really stand as a warning to people in this state about what could happen here if this new variant gets widespread. So the UK is on total lockdown at the moment, like we all were back in March. But my understanding is that it hasn't been enough. Even that, now they've had almost a month of total lockdown. Even that hasn't been enough to really bring the numbers down, because this new variant that is here in the United States, Dr. Fauci said it yesterday, in 20 states, they know they have it. They're not testing for it as aggressively as the UK is. So my assumption is that it's much more widespread here in America than we know. Even with the aggressive lockdown that's been in place now in the UK since the beginning of January, they're still not really bringing the numbers down in the way that they would like to and in the way that those lockdowns did last year. So this new variant means the virus spreads much more virulently, which means people have to be far more vigilant, and the lockdowns have to be that much more intense, just at a time, as Sam was saying, that nobody really wants them anymore. And even in the UK, people apparently are not really sticking to the rules in the way that they did. They're skipping out. A friend of mine went to Hyde Park in London this weekend. She said it was absolutely packed with people and they weren't all wearing masks. So people are fed up, and yet we're facing a moment where things could get worse because we have these new variants. And I think that was what was so refreshing, really, from the White House podium with Dr. Fauci yesterday. He was honest, right? I mean, and Joe Biden, the president, has been honest about that. And I think there is some clarity in the message now that maybe will be a wake-up call to people that we've been told it's going to be a difficult winter. It is actually going to be a difficult winter.
Yeah, Mika, that was one of the things that struck me listening to the president yesterday, is that he did something President Trump never did, which is to tell hard truths. President Trump liked to say it was one person coming in from China. He would say it's going to disappear. He said late in his presidential campaign at the rallies, we're rounding the corner. President Biden got up there and said another 100,000 people are going to die this month. We're going to be at 500,000 deaths. This is not going to be easy. I don't have a magic wand. We have to do hard work. Shouldn't be an extraordinary statement, because that's true, but it's much different than what we saw over the last year.
Absolutely. A group of Senate Democrats filed an ethics complaint calling for a probe into Republican Senators Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz. They are seeking for the Ethics Committee to investigate how the senators' objections to the Electoral College votes may have contributed to inciting the violent Capitol riot. Yesterday, Hawley released a statement that called the complaint, quote, a flagrant abuse of the Senate ethics process and a flagrant attempt to exact partisan revenge.
Says, actually, that is so hilarious, says the man who actually led an insurrection against the United States of America and tried to undermine the U.S. Constitution.
A spokesperson for Ted Cruz accused the Democrats of, quote, playing political games by filing frivolous ethics complaints. These two, Hawley and Cruz, both voted to reject electoral votes even after the violence at the Capitol disrupted the counting process. And Joe, not to go into it and get angry all over again, but it's very hard to forget what happened at the Capitol.
Well,
it's very hard to separate Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley and President Trump from what happened at the Capitol. And if there is anything that has happened over the past 4 years that needs to be reconciled, it's what happened at the Capitol.
Well, I mean, they're the trifecta of insurrection. Donald Trump, Josh Hawley, and Ted Cruz. Those three. And
still being parroted on Fox News in some ways.
It's
weird.
It is. I mean, there's some things that have been said on Fox News over the past couple of days that are shocking. That I'm absolutely flabbergasted that anybody running Fox News would allow some of those statements to be said, seeming to inspire an insurrection against the United States. But we'll worry about our channel and let them worry about their channel. But my God, it's unbelievable. But in this case, let's stay focused, Willie, on these United States senators who committed sedition against the United States of America, but for the fact that they were members of the United States Senate and probably will have immunity against charges. They would probably be going to jail for 20 years for sedition, for encouraging sedition against the United States of America. But their words, there is no doubt, their words led to an insurrection against the United States of America, along with Donald Trump. And it's hard for Ted Cruz to blame this on Democrats when Mitch McConnell said the same thing on the Senate floor a couple of days ago. And other Republicans have been saying the same thing. Roy Blunt said the same thing on the Senate floor earlier this week, that their reckless language, that the reckless language that was used by Donald Trump and other powerful people being Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, led to those seditious acts, led to an insurrection against the United States of America, led to assassination attempts against Nancy Pelosi, and at least a conspiracy to assassinate the Vice President Mike Pence and the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. And these two were right in the middle of it. They know it. That's why 3 newspapers, major newspapers in both their states, are demanding that they resign. It's why corporations don't want to give them $1, because really, do you want to give money to Benedict Arnold? Do you want to give money to, I'm serious, does your company, does your PAC want to give money to the modern day equivalent of Benedict Arnold's, who inspired people to come trash the Capitol, seek out Mike Pence to hang him, seek out Nancy Pelosi to shoot her, and kill a Capitol cop and injure other Capitol cops?
Yeah, and one of the enduring images of that day is Senator Hawley walking in to the United States Capitol, turning to that crowd that later would rush in and kill a police officer and seek Mike Pence, chant "Hang Mike Pence," looking for the speaker as well, with his fist raised in power, supporting what they were doing there in protest and eventually in their attack. Let's not let them whitewash history or rewrite history either. They came back in after the attack, after the riot, after people had died, and they made those speeches objecting to the results in Pennsylvania. They knew what had happened. They had just experienced what had happened and yet proceeded with it. And one other important point I think to make here, and it's one you've made before, Joe, is that there are in the United States Senate, how do we put this politely, people who aren't perhaps brilliant, people who, as you like to say, should stay away from household appliances and blenders around the kitchen, probably microwaves too. Yeah. These two are not among them. These two are not among them. These are two very smart guys and very cynical guys who knew exactly what they were doing. They knew the election was free and fair. They knew that the results were right. They knew that Joe Biden was the president of the United States, and yet they continued and continued after the attack on the Capitol. That makes it all the worse.
It really does. And it's not something I think we can completely turn the page on.
I don't think so. And Sam Stein, obviously other members of the Republican caucus in the Senate are outraged by what Josh Hawley did, by what Ted Cruz did. They have been. And so while they're going to be making their decision on whether to impeach Donald Trump, vote to convict Donald Trump in the impeachment proceedings, they may be trying to figure out what to do with these two members that were at the tip of the spear in this insurrection, whether they get censored or whether they vote them out of the United States Senate.
Yeah, I mean, there's like two interesting threads happening here. One is the very visceral anger that lawmakers feel about January 6th in a way that I have, and rightfully so, have not seen lawmakers feel. I mean, their lives were quite literally endangered. And part of it was because their own colleagues actually amped up the crowd that came in and tore apart their place of work and threatened to kill them. I mean, it's both remarkable and deeply unsettling in a way. I mean, there was an article last week where Democratic lawmakers were quoted on record, and this is not about Hawley or Cruz, but about other lawmakers saying they feared that their colleagues might kill them. Think about that. That's not like the most ideal place of work, right? So, that's the visceral anger that we have. The other, though, is sort of the weird political underpinnings of this moment, which is there's confusion and uncertainty whether Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz in the modern day Republican Party will end up being rewarded for their actions by the base of the party, which very much, by every sort of piece of evidence we have, still believes in Donald Trump, still follows Donald Trump, still harbors doubts about the legitimacy of the 2020 election. And there is an open-ended question as to whether ultimately down the road, Josh Hawley will benefit for the stand he took, for raising his fist in power, as Willie said it, because it will have catered to the most important part of the Republican base in the current incarnation of the Republican Party. So that's what you're seeing at play here. I think it's part of the reason why Mitch McConnell is out there forcefully making the statements he is making without actually naming the names of his Republican colleagues. They're trying to walk a very thin line here.
Well, Mitch McConnell understands, Caddy K, that the money dries up if the Republican Party becomes the party of Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, Donald Trump, and insurrection. And, if they become the party of rioting, if they become the party of murderers, if they become the party of people who get American flags and try to beat a Capitol Hill police officer to death, there is no future there. And yes, some people are talking about getting rid of Liz Cheney from the House leadership, which I think is pretty funny because that would be the best thing that could ever happen to Democrats in the House and Nancy Pelosi, because right now, Liz Cheney's about the only member in leadership that could go to any fundraiser, any corporation, anybody on K Street and raise a dime for the Republican House caucus. The only one.
Yeah, we don't know how long it's going to last, but you effectively have a corporate boycott of members of the Republican Party who have refused to accept that the election was won free and fairly. People like Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley are having the corporate funds pulled away from them. And that's the kiss of death for anybody wanting to run. And it sends a very strong signal going forward. If it is held by corporate America, let's see what happens. But that, you have to not do the kinds of things that Hawley and Cruz have done over the last couple of months if you want to be financed. And yet, you still see members of the Republican Party already turning on Joe Biden. I thought it was interesting to hear Rand Paul yesterday kind of pick apart Joe Biden's inaugural address, saying, well, he talks about unity, but actually this is an attack on all Republicans as being white supremacists. It clearly wasn't. Those words were not there in the inaugural address. But you're going to have members of the Republican Party who still look at the Trump base and say, I cannot afford to distance myself from them.
Yeah, well, if Rand Paul feels a bit sensitive about those words being uttered, it's probably because he thinks they apply directly to him. Yeah. Certainly don't apply to John Thune. They don't apply to Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell spoke out against this nonsense. They don't apply to Liz Cheney. They don't apply to Adam Kinzinger. They don't apply to most senators. They don't apply to Mitt Romney or James Langford. I mean, I could go through the overwhelming majority of the Republican caucus in the United States Senate that did not vote to discount black voters nationwide like Rand Paul did. I understand why Rand Paul is sensitive about this, because he's been on the forefront of spreading these lies, inspiring this insurrection, and sitting back and, yeah, like Willie said, sitting back, knowing better. He's not one of these yahoos that you find in the backbenches on both sides. He actually knows what he's doing, which makes it all the more cynical, all the more dangerous, all the more un-American.
Still ahead on Morning Joe, U.S. Capitol Police say they are investigating a report that a Republican congressman tried to bring a gun onto the House floor.
What an idiot.
We'll tell you what we know about.
What a total idiot. Come on.
We'll also be joined by
My God. A week or so after an insurrection, he tries to bring a gun onto the House floor.
Okay.
Well, with Capitol Police officers everywhere.
We'll be joined by former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb. He's joining us on the heels of President Biden's new national strategy for combating the pandemic. Plus, when exactly will President Trump's second impeachment trial get underway? Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is now suggesting mid-February. Also this morning, the newly elected chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Jamie Harrison, will be our guest right here on Morning Joe. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
We are not here to curse the darkness. We are here to light a candle.
I'm Chuck Rosenberg. On my podcast, The Oath, I talk with people who served with integrity and honor, men and women who light the way. This week, former Peace Corps Director Carrie Hessler-Radelet.
One of the most important elements of service is humility on the part of the person who is serving. We don't enter the community to save people. If anything, we are saved ourselves through service.
Join me for Season 4 of The Oath, an MSNBC podcast. Search for The Oath wherever you're listening right now and subscribe. New episodes every Wednesday.
You were sort of one of the stars of the inauguration. Were you aware that this photo was immediately sort of became the meme of the day?
Not at all. I was just sitting there trying to keep warm, trying to pay attention to what was going on.
I appreciate that you're not a politician who uses memes, but you became one. I mean, does your staff show them to you? Here you are with the Sex and the City girls.
Yeah, I've seen them.
Oh
Wow.
my gosh, Senator Bernie Sanders discussing his instant rise to meme stardom. Here's a few more, by the way. Here he is, added to the pattern of former First Lady Melania Trump's dress. A new twist on the film Weekend at Bernie's. And Baby Yoda, seen here taking some mittens fashion advice from the senator.
Well,
those were made, by the way, by repurposed sweaters in Vermont.
The best one, though, I thought, was he was in that famous Ghost scene with Demi Moore, shaping the pottery.
Oh my God!
with his mittens, that was the best. You know, Willie, I talked briefly before, and I don't want to get into it because I don't want to give people the attention that they probably want.
Very much, yes.
But I will say, Fox News had someone I know, a former leader of the Republican Party, saying that Democrats wanted, and I'm using his words here, Democrats wanted to, quote, exterminate all Republicans. Let me say that again for Fox News sponsors to let you know, for Fox News sponsors to let you know what's happening now on Fox News. That they're getting people who are Fox News contributors who are saying that Democrats, Joe Biden and Democrats, want to, quote, exterminate all Republicans. You also have Fox News hosts that are talking about how Democrats are using troops to make American people submissive, that they are not American troops. They are Democratic troops that are just there to show that they are in complete power. This is sick, Willie. It's especially sick and damaging. Here we are, a couple weeks after an insurrection against the United States of America. I understand that Fox News is having trouble because Newsmax is taking some of its viewers, and some of the people think that Fox News hasn't been harsh enough since the election. But we had mobs surging up to the United States Capitol a couple of weeks ago, and you have a former Republican leader saying that all Democrats want to, quote, exterminate Republicans.
Yeah, I mean,
that is patently un-American for him to say that. He is trying to gin up the base so he can make money on his mailing lists, so they can drive ratings up. And so he can inspire an insurrection against the United States as well. And for another host to be as anti-American as he is, attacking our men and women in uniform, saying they're not Americans, that they're Democrats and they're there to make the American people submit to the Democrats' will, that is beyond grotesque. Of all the crazy stuff we have seen, we've never been to this point yet.
You get the distinct sense, Joe, that since Donald Trump turned on Fox News a couple of months ago and encouraged his supporters to stop watching and suggested some other outlets like the one you just mentioned, that they're playing a little bit of catch up over there, that they're having to sort of woo back some of those viewers and continuing with the lie that Donald Trump won the election. Joe Biden was sworn into office on Wednesday. Even QAnon supporters are saying, okay, the gig is up. The jig is up. We lost this battle. We're moving on. But many at Fox News are continuing with that dangerous lie. And as you say, it's manifesting itself in ways that talk about those troops in the streets, for example, in a vacuum, as if that was not a response to a violent attack on the Capitol 2.5 weeks ago, that as if they were just there as some show of force against Republicans or conservatives or whoever, as if they weren't there to seal off a city that was attacked, that was literally attacked 2 weeks ago. Let's go to NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent, host of Way Too Early, Casey Hunt. Casey, good morning. Good to see you. Let's talk impeachment here. Mitch McConnell says he wants the vote delayed by a couple of weeks in the Senate, the trial delayed by a couple of weeks in the Senate. What are you hearing about whether or not Democrats will accept that, and how is this going to play out?
Yeah, Willie, good morning. Good to see you, too. The politics of this are complicated and layered because Democrats obviously want to get a move on with Joe Biden, President Biden's cabinet picks, and some of his early legislative priorities. So from that perspective, this would give them a couple of weeks to do that. But of course, the question is, what is this distance if the time passes from the insurrection on January 6th? What happens to the levels of anger, to the focus on what unfolded that day? And there are conflicting views on this. We are learning more. Every day that goes by, we're learning more. And Joe made this point a couple of days ago about just how bad it was, about what happened at the Capitol, about the danger that these members of Congress were in, about the level of threat to the then Vice President Mike Pence, to other members of Congress. The intention was clearly, in some cases, to potentially try and hold hostage and kill these members of Congress. So it's possible that the more information we learn, the more it's going to become clear that they do really need to do something to hold Donald Trump accountable for the role that he played in making this happen. But the flip side of this, Willie, is that also the more distance you put between that event and the trial, the more we potentially turn back to politics as usual, the more people retreat into their partisan corners, the more people become nervous about what Donald Trump's retribution might look like. I mean, I think the real question here, the Republican Party has a chance to shut the door on Donald Trump forever. But some of them are going to have to step up and sacrifice their own political careers if they want to do that. And time again, we have seen that these people are simply not willing to do that, Joe.
That's right. They don't have the capacity, which is at this point stunning because it's their own future. U.S. Capitol Police say that they are investigating a report that Republican Congressman Andy Harris of Maryland tried to bring a gun onto the House floor. Why? Why? During a vote yesterday, police stopped Harris at security. A security official present tells NBC News he saw the firearm on Harris and told his superiors. New metal detectors were ordered by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi after the deadly riot at the Capitol. They have become a flashpoint among some Republican members and have at times created tension with police. HuffPost reports Harris attempted to get another member to take the gun from him so he could go vote. The member told Harris he didn't have a license.
What's the guy
and refused to hold the weapon
gun
for him.
around for?
Harris then left on the elevator and 10 minutes later returned to the House chamber. He placed his cell phone and keys on a desk to the side, did not set off the magnetometer, and was allowed to enter the House floor to vote. The Capitol official added that House members are allowed to carry firearms in the halls on Capitol grounds, including the Capitol building, but not the floor, adding that ammo has to be separately compartmentalized.
Okay.
Harris' office released a statement saying that the congressman has been threatened.
Yeah, we all have.
And never confirms that he's carrying a firearm.
Really, the stupidity is just extraordinary. And by the way, I'm speaking as somebody that's done this, that's made thousands and thousands of votes.
You haven't done this. You haven't brought a gun.
No. But I've been there and I voted. And Casey, as long as Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz and Donald Trump aren't trying to get Americans to kill Nancy Pelosi and kill Mike Pence and commit insurrection against the United States of America, you know, you've been up there. Casey knows. There are Capitol Hill cops everywhere. It's more secure than ever for this guy and for others to think they're going to be able to carry a gun onto the House floor when we have Republican members of Congress that have had fundraising letters that show pictures of AOC and other Democrats while the Republican is holding an AR-15 and saying, I'm coming to target these women, they better watch out, or something along those lines. Who the hell would be comfortable with anybody having a gun on the House floor?
Yeah, I mean,
Joe, the House floor was. Sorry, Kathy, go ahead.
Go ahead, Casey.
The House floor was the safest. Was the safest place in Washington
That's where I'm going to go.
January
Hold on a second.
6th.
We're going to start with a person who has a name that starts with a K. Just joking. Go ahead, Casey. You go first.
Okay. Sorry about that. It was the safest place in Washington, the House floor, until January 6th, when it was Republicans who helped incite this mob led by President Donald Trump that went in there in the first place. And some of the members of the House have suggested that this is the right way to remedy things. And that's why there are magnetometers. And, also, Joe, I would say Republicans are making a big deal about being on the side of the cops here. There have been some altercations between Republican members who don't want to get wanded going onto the House floor and the Capitol Police, who are just trying to do their jobs and keep everybody safe. So, there are a lot of problems with all of this.
And they're whining, Caddy, 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks after their lives were in danger. And these guys are being whining about being wanded before they go onto the House floor. Who the hell do they think they are?
It's kind of, libertarianism at its most absurd extreme, right? We are never going to have the government tell us what to do with our weapons. And it's a show. Andy Harris isn't really going to go in there and defend anybody, let alone himself, by thinking that he can take a gun onto that. What do you think he's going to do by taking a gun onto the House floor? If there's another insurrection, is he going to be the guy that defends the rest of the members of Congress? No, he's doing this for his electors, his voters back home, who are diehard Trump supporters, some of them, and he is showing that he is still fighting. I mean, it's echoes of that rally that was outside the White House that started all of this. This is what this feels like. It's like we're going to show the liberals, we're going to show that we're still fighting, and we're going to make some kind of, frankly, absurd gesture of trying to take a gun onto the House floor, which is not going to achieve anything.
No, it won't achieve anything. And it's interesting. He whines about his life being threatened. Well, get in a very long line in the age of Trump and get way the hell behind Mika and me on that front. But he's never had his life threatened by somebody actually inside the chamber. There are Democrats who can say that they have had their life threatened, or they have a reason to believe that they are being targeted by somebody carrying an AR-15 and sending it around saying, I'm coming to get these members of Congress. So please, please stop your whining. Start getting wanded and go in and just vote and shut up. Okay. You are not special. Get in line behind the 435 other members. And you know what? Take your medicine, because it's people on your side of the aisle who are responsible for this, not AOC. Oh, no, not AOC. Not Bernie Sanders. No. Not Elizabeth Warren. This is on you. This is on your caucus. This is on your party. It's all your fault. So shut up and do what everybody else is doing. You, repeat after me, you are not special. Now, on that happy front, I got to ask you one question, Casey. There's a little back and forth. Let's go from idiots trying to carry guns onto the House floor to actually the business of the House and the Senate. I know right now on the Senate side, there's a lot of back and forth about this power sharing arrangement. Who's going to be running what committees? Is there going to be a filibuster? And I just, you know what? The news coverage irritates me so much because, like, people write, just 2 days ago, they were talking unity. Now they are fighting about, well, of course they're going to fight about, like, how they set up the Senate. Like, what do they expect people to hold hands and, like, sing Kumbaya together and give daisies out to each? No, they got to do their job. They've got to, like, negotiate back and forth to figure out to set up the Senate. And no, it's not going to be an easy process because a lot's at stake. But that doesn't mean they can't work together over the next 2 years. I think I've had my say.
Yes,
what
you've done
say
well.
you?
There is a lot at stake, Joe, and this setup is going to matter a lot. And frankly, they're trying to work out a whole bunch of stuff at once, not just how the Senate's going to be set up, but the timing of the impeachment trial. And Mitch McConnell is making a power play here, too. He's trying to get Chuck Schumer to commit to not ending the legislative filibuster. Now, you can go down a wonky rabbit hole about that, but the politics of this are actually really interesting and complicated because AOC is considering, she's been open about considering a primary challenge against Chuck Schumer. And getting rid of the filibuster in the Senate is a huge issue for Democratic activists. It is in many ways their number one issue because it potentially opens up the chance to do so much in the first 2 years of a Biden administration. So what does Chuck Schumer say? He knows he doesn't have the votes in his Senate caucus to get rid of the filibuster. So he could, in theory, make that commitment to Mitch McConnell, say, okay, fine. I know I don't have the votes. We won't get rid of it. But if he did that, he's potentially putting his whole political career on the line, risking that primary challenge, putting himself right in the spotlight, in the firing line. And guess what? Mitch McConnell is acutely aware of all of that.
Hey guys, Willie Geist here, reminding you to check out the Sunday Sit Down podcast. On this week's episode, I get together with Rob Lowe to talk about his early success in Hollywood, the pitfalls that came with that fame, and his latest starring role on television in the hit show 911 Lone Star. You can listen to our full conversation right now on the Sunday Sit Down podcast. Get it for free wherever you download yours.
And you know, Willie, by the way, this is Mitch McConnell's job. By the way, again, as we're a day or two away from the inauguration, yes, I'm preaching unity. Yes, I believe 10 moderates We can see more legislation passed over the next 2 years than have been passed over the last decade. Meaningful legislation, bipartisan legislation. But it's Mitch McConnell's job to push and fight for the best deal he can get for his conference. It's Chuck Schumer's job to fight and push for, the best deal he can get for his caucus. That's just the way it goes. And people should grow up and not be so shocked and stunned and deeply saddened that actually these two leaders are going to be tussling and fighting and trying to get the best deal they can get. That's why they're where they are.
Yeah, exactly. That's the way Congress works. As you know, that's the way the Senate works. They're going to fight and they're going to scratch and they're going to claw to get a better deal. So it doesn't mean that unity has dissolved. And I think the unity that President Biden is talking about is a national unity. There's never going to be complete unity, of course, in the halls of Congress. That's the point of Congress. They debate and they argue, and we'll see what they come up with. But they've got a lot in front of them right now in terms of COVID relief, as Casey said, and also managing an impeachment trial over on the side in the next couple of weeks. Meanwhile, President Biden also saying he has confidence in FBI Director Christopher Wray and plans to keep him in his role. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki confirmed that yesterday. Wray, who has more than 6 years left in his 10-year term, had no indication that President Biden or his team was dissatisfied with him, a senior FBI official said Wednesday night, adding, "The sentiments shared all have been positive." Wray was named to head the Bureau in 2017 by former President Donald Trump. Meanwhile, arrests yesterday in the aftermath of the January 6th Capitol riot include a Michigan man accused of attacking police with a hockey stick. According to an FBI affidavit, Michael Joseph Foy was arrested in a suburb of Detroit and indicted on several charges, including forcibly assaulting a federal officer and obstruction of law enforcement. The affidavit says Foy could be seen in a number of riot videos. The New York Times reports the FBI identified Foy using postings on his father's Facebook page. When discussing a picture of his son, the affidavit notes Foy's father said, quote, "He was raised better." Joining us now, NBC News correspondent covering national security and intelligence, Ken Dilanian, and State Attorney General for Palm Beach County in Florida, Dave Ehrenberg. Guys, good morning. Ken, let me begin with you. Another case here of social media posts from the people who were there, getting them into trouble and getting them into the hands of law enforcement.
Good morning, Willie. Yeah, that's right. So far, this has been a relatively easy investigation for the FBI because many of the 140 people who have been charged federally thus far have either posted about their activities, have been shown on video, or have come forward to the FBI and admitted their involvement. Now, it's going to get more complicated from here as the Justice Department pursues potentially charges of seditious conspiracy, the charge of trying to overthrow the U.S. government or impede the execution of U.S. law, and that carries 20 years in prison. So far, they've charged a couple of militia members, but most of the people have been just stupid. I mean, quite frankly. For example, there was a Houston police officer, Tam Pham, who, when the FBI went to see him in Texas, initially denied being in the Capitol. And then they showed him photos on his phone of him in the Capitol. And he admitted to having been there. He's been fired from the Houston Police Department. One sort of really troubling thing about a lot of this, Willie, is that an NPR analysis found that 20% of the people arrested have some sort of tie to the military, either a military veteran or currently serving member of the military. Which really raises a host of questions and shows that there is a problem of extremism connected to the U.S. military in this country that the Pentagon needs to grapple with.
Yes. Friends of a man arrested last week for threatening House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser are speaking out against former President Trump. Cleveland Meredith Jr. was arrested in Washington, D.C. on January 13th with a truck full of weapons, 2,500 rounds of ammunition, and a phone full of text messages about his intentions. A new article in The New Yorker profiles the Georgia dad turned Trump fanatic and describes him as becoming increasingly racist and unmoored from fact. The article says, quote, one of Meredith's former classmates blamed the president. Trump's blanked Cleve's life. he said, adding, quote, lost his family, his marriage, his mind, and now his freedom. He did it to himself, but he had a lot of help. And Dave Ehrenberg, I mean, this is how it begins. And there is, I see a direct link from the president to these people, but in the eyes of the law, how hard will it be to connect those dots?
Mika, it's tough because the crime of incitement is tough to prove because the First Amendment protects lots of speech, including speech that is inflammatory. To get to the crime of incitement, you need to show that the speech was intended to incite imminent lawless action and is likely to produce such action. The key is to show intent, and that's hard to do. It's not enough to say, hey, look at those people who are radicalized. You have to look at the mindset of the speaker. And one way to show it is to show their actions before and after. So if you want to charge the president with incitement based on his speech at the rally, you can look at his actions afterwards, which are not helpful to him, mind you, because afterwards it took hours for him to say, go home. And even then he said, we love you. You're very special. He's talking about domestic terrorists, mind you. And if it is true, as Senator Ben Sasse says, that Trump was delighted when he watched the riots unfold in real time, that would be damning to him. But still, it's a tough burden. And prosecutors are going to have to develop this evidence to go after MAGA leaders. And I was thinking, I saw a meme that says that if the prosecutors are able to do so, MAGA would have to be changed from Make America Great Again to Many Are Getting Arrested.
That's what it stands for now.
Yeah.
Sam Stein.
You watch this, and Ken talked about how some of these people are just plain old stupid with how they posted on here. But we all, maybe we don't all, but I've talked to people who have gotten sucked in these rabbit holes, specifically QAnon, and it's just a remarkable amount of disinformation that they assume is real. And the question I always have when I talk to them is, how do you get them out of these rabbit holes? That's not the question I wanted to ask for Ken, but I just want to make that point. Ken, I'm curious from your perspective. Obviously, law enforcement's looking at this for valid reasons. They're making arrests. They're going to bring charges, but there is a political component to this too. There's the question of, do committees on Congress take the time and the effort to investigate what happened, bring in their fellow lawmakers, ask them questions about what kind of role they played in potentially fomenting this, and put together some sort of report of any variety. And it's not just committees in Congress. Does the incoming Biden NSC look into this matter as well? Are you picking up any of that in your reporting, asking around to people, just how much are the political entities, not just the law enforcement entities, going to get involved in looking at what happened on January 6th?
Yeah, Sam, I'm absolutely sensing a desire among members of Congress and congressional staff that I talk to and other political figures to do a deep dive into what happened here, a potential 9/11 commission style inquiry, because there's so many unanswered questions about the security failure, about the intelligence failure, which is even more shadowy. What actually did the FBI know about potential threats of violence? What did the Capitol Police know? What was passed on? What wasn't passed on? There is a sense that security agencies were paralyzed. Was that because they were concerned that essentially these were Donald Trump's people, and they didn't feel like they could act completely and fully to stop what happened on January 6th? And there's this whole issue of how the FBI deals with domestic radicalization, which you guys were just talking about, and domestic terrorism. There's a big First Amendment barrier here, and they have always felt constrained from using the same kind of surveillance techniques against these domestic extremists that they do against people who connect to Al Qaeda or ISIS. And there's a movement afoot to sort of change laws around that, and that may be scrutinized. So I absolutely think
can I ask you about that really quickly? Yeah, Ken, I'm sorry to interrupt. We have a delay here. But can I ask you really quickly? I've never understood why we don't go as aggressively after domestic terrorists as we do Islamic terrorists. It's not as if we didn't have a domestic terrorist blow up a federal building in Oklahoma City in 1996. It's not as if we haven't seen the rise of domestic terrorism, especially through the Trump era. Why in the world would there not be stronger domestic terrorism laws?
Joe, you're 100% right. And I actually covered the 1993 bombing of the Murrah Building by Timothy McVeigh, a domestic extremist and military veteran. And it seems like we've lost the lessons of that horrific attack. Look, I hear two explanations from law enforcement people about this. One is we don't have the right laws. We don't have the legal tools. There are barriers to surveilling people engaged in what the FBI calls First Amendment activity. And until they actually commit violence, we can't surveil them. Whereas anybody who sort of expresses any kind of affiliation with Al-Qaeda or ISIS, the FBI is on them. But then you talk to another group of people, including people who have worked domestic terrorism at the FBI, who say, really, it's more of a question of political will and resources. We have the tools if we really, and Joyce Vance, our friend Joyce Vance, NBC News contributor, will say this as well. There are the legal tools. We need to get more serious, the FBI and the Justice Department, about applying them and have the will to conduct surveillance and to infiltrate these chat rooms and run informants the way they do against Al-Qaeda and ISIS, against these patriot and militia groups. But there's going to be a huge pushback from that because, you know, these people have connections to Republican members of Congress, as we've seen, and this becomes much more controversial, guys.
You know, it would seem that Republicans would have every bit as much of an incentive as Democrats now to actually go aggressively after these terrorist groups, these domestic terrorist groups, because they are so associated with some of the fringe elements are so associated with it. So Republicans should want them to be rooted out as much as Democrats. And by the way, Mika, I had said the Oklahoma City bombing was in 96. It was actually in 1995.
There you go. Ken Dilanian and Dave Ehrenberg, thank you so much for being on this Friday morning. And still ahead, on his first full day in office, President Biden unveils a national strategy for combating the coronavirus pandemic, one that he says is based on science, not politics. Former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb joins us at the top of the hour to weigh in on all that. Morning Joe is coming right back.
Hi, it's MSNBC's Hayes Brown. You know, these days there's just so much news to wrap your head around, it's challenging to get a deeper understanding of things. So every morning, go beyond the headlines with MSNBC Daily. It features written perspectives from people you know and trust, including Trymaine Lee, Mehdi Hassan, Liz Plank, and Frank Figliuzzi. They'll take you inside the most important issues of our times. Issues like systemic racism, domestic terrorism, and how we can bridge our political divide. Plus, you'll get a fresh take every morning from me. Start your day with MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.